Hi, Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and lately I've been doing a lot of deep dive and analysis type videos. It's time to go back and do something just kind of for fun and mock some Peter Jackson movies. So, this video has been something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and it's probably going to end up being a multi-part series because I'm sure there's going to be way more than I can handle here. But basically what I'm going to be talking about is changes that Peter Jackson made, either things that he altered or things that he added into the story that, when you think about them, aren't logical within the context of the story. And I mean that even in the context of Peter Jackson's own movies. So anytime that he has the characters say or do something that is completely at odds with what we already know or should know from the movies, that's, what I'm talking about, is things like that. So without any real further introduction, let's get started. And I'm going to be looking in this one at least at the Fellowship. So one of the first major changes that really doesn't make any sense comes all the way after we get to Rivendell. And up to this point, most of the changes are, they may be a little weird or whatever, but they don't really have any internal contradiction type problems. But when we get to Rivendell, Sam and Frodo have a conversation where Sam's like, "We did what Gandalf wanted, didn't we? We got the ring this far to Rivendell, and I thought we'd be off home." And Frodo says, "You're right, Sam. The ring will be safe here in Rivendell, and I am ready to go home." But this completely ignores the fact that we already know from Gandalf and from seeing things elsewhere as well. I mean, there's things that we're privy to as moviegoers that Frodo is not privy to, such as the fact that, the Nazgul are asking for Baggins. Frodo doesn't know that in the movie, but Frodo does know from Gandalf that Sauron has learned the name of the Shire and of Baggins from Gollum. So he is looking for Baggins. He knows this. He already knows this. How can he possibly go back to the Shire, which Sauron is looking for, as Baggins, who Sauron is also looking for, and expect to survive? This is handled much better in the books, of course, because Frodo is well aware, by the point that Gandalf gives him this information, that he's going to have to go into permanent exile. He's like, "I'm fleeing from danger into danger," is what he says in the books, with no real hope of return. Frodo went there and back again, to get a treasure. I go away to throw one away and probably never come back. So Frodo knows this in the book. In the movie, Frodo apparently forgets all about the fact that his life is in total danger and is just like, "Yep, I'm just going to go back to the Shire, go back to leading my happy life." Another reason this doesn't work, and you can tell why this was done, right? And this is probably going to be a running theme with a lot of these. This is done for dramatic effect, to set us up for Frodo, really doesn't want to go on the quest, and he's about to be saddled with it anyway. This doesn't work for this reason, which is, it's, if you were trying to set it up just for that, you could find other ways to do it that wouldn't be contradictory to the information we already know in the movie, right? But quite apart from that, it still doesn't even work, because even if you knew nothing going into watching these movies for the first time, you'd never read Lord of the Rings, never seen or heard any of the other adaptations, by the point we get to Rivendell, Frodo's the main character, and he's going to be the one who carries this on. I mean, there's no way around that. I mean, even from just watching the trailers, that Frodo makes it past Rivendell, because I remember there being trailer footage of him in, like, Lothlorien, I think. So the idea that Frodo is not going to continue on, and then we get Elrond saying, "Gandalf, the ring cannot stay here," we kind of already know this as viewers. We're not really being set up for some dramatic turn that Frodo is, going to get what he doesn't really want. And this is true in the book too, right? Frodo in the book says, "I hope I really don't have to go that far, all the way to Mordor." And Gandalf says, "You may not. That may be for others." They're open-minded at that point. course, in hindsight, we all know that that's exactly what's going to happen, but in the movie especially, we really already know Frodo is going to be continuing on. And so there's really no value that comes out of him doing this other than it just kind of sets up an emotional roller coaster of him being like, I'm done, I can go back and be happy. Oh no, I have to go to Mordor because everybody else is mad. So that doesn't work. That's problem number one. And I've already kind of teased part two of this because that conversation that Elrond and Gandalf have, that's where the next one comes in, actually. Because Gandalf says, we can ask no more of Frodo. And then in the following conversation, they have, all this back and forth. And in that conversation, it is implied, if not by words, and somewhat by words, but also just by Gandalf's facial expression, that he thinks that it'll be safe in Rivendell and everything is fine now, because by the time we get to Elrond saying, Gandalf, the ring cannot stay here, his face just kind of falls like, oh, I was afraid you were going to say that. Like, how did you not know that this was, inevitable? I mean, again, in the movie, it is true, we only get Elrond's reveal of only there can it be unmade after this point, but Gandalf has already studied a whole bunch about the ring, learned a whole bunch about the ring, and we already know sufficient information to know that if Sauron ever gets it back, everything is going to be over. We also have sufficient information to believe that Elrond does not have a vast army that can withstand Mordor forever. I mean, Elrond's Rivendell is not exactly, full of soldiers. Now, granted, that's kind of deceptive because all those elves there probably could put up a solid fight, and Rivendell was set up to be a refuge. I mean, that's true. But by the time we get to this point in the movie, to think that Gandalf doesn't know that it can't just sit there in Rivendell is really not consonant with every expectation we already have set up. Like, even if we don't have explicit information that's contradictory to this, we know as moviegoers very clearly that this can't be the end of the trip. I mean, we already know that. There has to be more, especially because going into it, I don't remember if it was actually a thing that you knew how long the movie was going into it, but you knew the movie was not over at this point, and you knew it was going to have to go further. And it just doesn't make any sense that Gandalf, of all people, would be one who wouldn't know this. He's one of the wise. He's one of the White Council. He's, none of this information is stated in the Lord of the Rings itself, but it's like, how does Gandalf, who knows so much, and we have gone and studied ancient documents about the ring, and how does he not know, of all people? Like, he ought to know more than practically everybody. And the other thing is, if Gandalf doesn't know, how does Elrond know? I mean, Elrond says only there can it be unmade. He doesn't have any practical experience of this. Nobody's ever tried to unmake it before. And there's just really no reason why Elrond should know this, but Gandalf wouldn't. There's no logic to that at all. So this whole setup that, Gandalf is somehow caught off guard or disappointed by the fact that it can't stay in Rivendell, it just doesn't really work. Also in this conversation is another change that just doesn't make any sense, which is Elrond's whole comment about men. Men are weak. And then he goes on specifically to say, they're scattered, divided, leaderless. And it's like, what do you mean they're scattered, divided, and leaderless? Who is scattered, divided, and leaderless? In the rest of the movie, we will see kingdoms with leaders like Denethor and Theoden. They're not scattered, and they're not really even divided. Like, we know even in the context of the movie that Rohan and Gondor have a long-standing alliance. This becomes clear. They have the beacons that Pippin lights, which that doesn't even make sense outside the context of some kind of alliance. Now, there is a certain amount of truth to what Elrond says, in the sense that the northern kingdom of Arnor, after it disintegrated, all the men that lived up there, they're, just kind of living freely without any significant leadership structure, which is true, but that's not terribly pertinent to what we're really talking about here either, because Elrond is specifically thinking about the fact that, men are weak, the pride of Numenor is forgotten, and all this other stuff. It's like Gondor is still a surviving kingdom of Numenorians. Like, that's not gone. And it's still very much not totally divided and leaderless. Denethor is a leader. He may not be the best leader ever, but he's still a leader. So Elrond's words here get contradicted by the rest of the movie. Like, why was this said? Why was this line introduced? Now, again, running theme, this is set up so as to give us a kind of emotional turn whenever Gandalf says there's one who could reclaim the throne of Gondor, and Elrond says he turned from that path a long time ago. This is all setting up, Aragorn. It's like, oh, Strider is actually the heir of kings, and then he's going to be the king, and Elrond's like, no, he's not, and he's turned from that, which, that gets into the whole problem of Aragorn and his character arc, which I've discussed in another video, but the point being, like, all of this is designed to have this dramatic setup for, oh, Aragorn's going to become king. And even at this point, we know, as moviegoers, even if you knew nothing about the Lord of the Rings, at this point, Aragorn is going to become king, because, it's just such an obvious setup. But the setup is completely unnecessary, first of all, and also, it doesn't make any sense, because it's contradicted by everything we learn about kingdoms of men later on in the movie. Now, a further one, this time we're skipping ahead, finally, out of Rivendell. Now we're going to talk about Moria a couple of times. And one of the first key things about Moria is that, how do Gandalf and Saruman know there's a Balrog, and nobody else really seems to know this? And why does Gandalf not tell anybody about this? It doesn't make any sense. And you have to understand the setup for this too. In the book, of course, what we have is a disagreement between Aragorn and Gandalf about which road they should take. And Aragorn's all like, I really don't want to go back to Moria. That place was evil. And Gandalf's like, I think we're better go through Moria. In the movie, Gandalf does not want to go through Moria. And we learn by a cutaway to Saruman and him looking through some ancient book or other that he doesn't want to go to Moria because he knows the reason the dwarves were kicked out was because of a Balrog. But he doesn't bother to share this information with literally anybody. Instead, they get up onto Caradhras in a massive snowstorm where there's very little hope of, successfully crossing. And he keeps pushing them despite this fact. He's like, one of them says, we have to get off the mountain. And he's like, no! And he starts trying to counter Saruman's weather spell, which is also that doesn't really need to be there, but whatever. And it's only after it's practically turned to disaster, when there's a huge avalanche that, rock slide or whatever, that almost kicks them all off the mountain, that they start talking about other options. And Gimli throws out, if we cannot go over the mountain, let us go under it. Let us pass through the mines of Moria. And then we get Saruman's cutaway and all this stuff. And there's some debate, and Boromir's like, we have to get off of here because this is going to be the death of the hobbits. And Gandalf then just says, let the ring-bearer decide. And Frodo says, we will go through the mines. Well, he's been presented with two options. We can go under the mountain, which is going to be dark, and who knows. He might have heard some of Gimli's conversation earlier about Balin, his cousin, being there and whatever. He might have heard that and he might not. It's not clear because that conversation took place while, it was kind of just him and Gandalf sitting there, and then they were watching, Frodo and Sam were watching Merry and Pippin practice swordplay with Boromir. So it's not clear how much Frodo actually knows. If he caught any of that, he would have heard Gandalf's comment about, no, Gimli, I would not pass through the mines of Moria unless I had no other choice. But he has no reason why. Gandalf has literally never given a reason why he doesn't want to pass through Moria. Whereas Gimli has said that his cousin Balin would give them a royal welcome. Okay, so Gimli makes it sound really good. Gandalf makes it sound really bad, but gives no reason for that. And he's in the middle of a snowstorm on top of a mountain where it looks like they're all about to either freeze to death or get knocked off the mountain by snowdrifts. There's only so many options Frodo has at this point. Of course he picks the mines. If you wanted the ring bearer to make an intelligent decision, maybe you should have said, by the way, there's a fire demon down there. Like, he knows this information and doesn't tell anybody. And it's just like, how do you get that stupid, Gandalf? How do you get that stupid? It doesn't make any sense. Why would he not say something about this? Why? There's no rationale for that at all. Now, the final one I'm going to cover in this video is very closely connected to this because it relates to Balin, right? Gimli is all like, my cousin Balin would give us a royal welcome. And, of course, Gandalf's like, nope, I don't want to go there. Wouldn't go there unless I had no other choice. And we never get any indication from Gandalf that he expects that Balin is dead. In fact, we get no expectation from anybody that anybody thinks Balin is dead. Now, in the book, the whole reason Gimli and some other dwarves come to Rivendell in the first place is they've gotten these messages from Mordor, and they've also, had Balin go out several years prior and then stopped hearing from him, and they fear the worst. So they've got these two things that are weighing on their minds, and they want Elrond's advice. So they're already in the book expecting that Balin's colony has not gone well. That said, in the movie, we get really no indication of anything about when Balin went there. We only know that Gimli expects Balin to be there, and nobody expresses any thought to the contrary. The only thing Gandalf says is, I would not go there unless I had no other choice, which he never explains, as I just mentioned. So, when we get to Moria itself, we then get in there and we find dead dwarves, and some goblin arrows as well. But the significant thing about the dead dwarves, they're clearly old dead dwarves. They have been dead for some time. They have no flesh. They're just about all bone. And in fact, the one that Pippin takes the arrow and turns it and knocks the helmet down into the well, he does that on one that's got cobwebs all over it. Like, that doesn't... These changes don't happen overnight. And even if you want to assume that the orcs, took the meat off of these things so that they went to bone instantly because the goblins basically cannibalized them, you wouldn't have one of them sitting on top of the well with an arrow in its chest. Like, his bones would be scattered from the goblins trying to eat off of them. He wouldn't be sitting there intact, in armor. I mean, so we know from the movie that these dwarves have been dead for a pretty good little while. Especially because in the mines of Moria, there's no sunlight, there's nothing growing, there's no particular reason to think there's a whole lot of anything alive down there other than the goblins, of course, that we eventually do run into. And so it's not like this decay would have happened at a super rapid pace because the elements that would normally do a lot of that work just are not present. So this whole idea that Gimli has an expectation that Balin is going to be there and give them a royal welcome, and he has no clue that these dwarves are probably dead, or at least in serious trouble, is just a little ridiculous. It doesn't really make any sense in light of the facts that we do learn in the movie. So this, everything about that just is like, why Gimli is expecting this is never explained. And why nobody seems to have a clue that they've all been killed is never explained. It doesn't really work logically. I mean, yeah, they don't have phones. They don't have telegraphs. They don't even have the Pony Express, sure, but you would think dwarves that had been dead that long, there would be some indication somehow through lack of messages or some kind of contact that they were no longer alive, or at least they were no longer able to make contact for some reason, which couldn't be for anything other than a bad reason. So how Gimli doesn't know this, or at least fear this, and then to top it all off, whenever they find Balin's tomb, Gandalf says, "It's as I feared." You never said that! Why didn't you say that? And explain why! Like, why does Gandalf fear it? That's the other thing. It's like, in Gimli's mind, it's just obvious that Balin is going to be there alive, waiting to welcome them with open arms. And Gandalf, when they get to Balin's tomb, is like, "Yep, I was afraid of that." And wait, why were you afraid of that and never even said something to Gimli? Like, you could have said whenever Gimli was all hot to go there, you know, he's probably dead, right? Because nobody's heard from him in a few years. You know, the incongruity, like, this fellowship is the most non-information sharing group of people. Well, I'm sorry, actually, it's not the fellowship, it's Gandalf. Gandalf shares no information. It's really bad. That's enough for one video. I've got more stuff, and I'm probably not even done with the Fellowship of the Ring, but I've definitely got some other stuff from the other two movies, but I'm not going to cover all of them in one video. That's going to be too much. So this is probably part one. I don't know when the next one's going to come out because I need to come up with a solid list and try to cover as much as I can. But, oh boy. And this is a prime example of why you don't mess with a story that's already really coherent and really solid and try to impose your own dramatic tensions on it at the expense of that logical coherence. You know, I love these movies still. They're still really good movies as movies. But the more you watch them, the more you realize there's some problems that, you know, wouldn't be there if they just stuck to, you know, the script that was basically already written for them. Now, that's not to say that they had to cover every little thing. They didn't have to have Glowin and talk about the dwarf colony and all that. But they didn't have to introduce the idea that everybody's expecting Balin to be there. You know, it's just like, leave it alone. It's fine the way it is. You can leave some things out to save time. You can change a few things to save time. But the minute you start trying to dramatize things that don't necessarily need to be dramatized for the point of the real story, you run into these problems. And it just, you know, after a while, it dampens the appreciation of the movie because you realize, that doesn't work. And now it's in your head and you can't not think of it. So, you know, that's why I think this is kind of important. It's a good lesson in terms of storytelling and adaptation. Make sure your story is coherent. And if you're adapting a story, make sure you're not making a change that results in something completely illogical. So, anyway, this is part one. Hope you enjoyed it and are looking forward to some more. If you did enjoy it, please give it a like, share it around, subscribe for all my future content. If you're on YouTube, make sure you click that bell icon. Don't forget to check the description for social and support links and also the Zero Shoes affiliate link. And until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore Channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially elf friends Paul Leone and Nathan Dufour.